All right, seventh graders, I wanted to give you a nice little overview for this week, but it's going to be a little bit longer than some of your other videos, simply because there's 6 different points that I'm going to have to catch you up with as were outlined in this lesson. So I'm more or less going to be going through the different materials that you have in your lesson overview. And I think it's going to be really helpful for you to prepare for your quiz well. But that being said, you will probably want to read through this and follow along as I'm talking through everything with you. So first off, I've said many times now that this class will build on itself. And this is probably one of the best examples of that we've had so far. We started off this class by saying we need to talk about a word, a term, and a definition. The term is the thing in and of itself, right? This is a term, right? We signify this by using a word, such as book. And by the word, I mean the sounds coming out of my mouth. The thing that I write on the board would B-O-O-K. Book. That word points to the term, whether the thing in actuality or the thing as it exists in my head. And then I can connect a word to a term by a definition. That's one of the first things we want to figure out. Well, that means definitions are going to be extraordinarily important. Why? Because they're the way that we use words to connect a word, a given word, to its term that it's supposed to signify. If you don't know what a water bottle is, and I have the word water bottle, but I don't have any concept of the term water bottle, that little thing that holds water that you can screw the cap onto, I don't have a conception of that in my head. I need a way to grasp onto that. And so we talked about 3 different ways that you can do that in the last lesson. One is that you can give me a synonym for it. Now, the difficulty with that is there's a lot of words that don't really have an exact synonym for it. One of the most classic examples is like water. You can say water, a synonym for it is H2O, but it's not really a synonym. That's more or less the different parts of it. The term water doesn't seem to, in and of itself, have an exact synonym. And there's arguably that's the case with most, if not all, words. There's close approximations that I can offer, but I won't have the exact synonym. So you can say, well, I can give you examples of something. I can either hold up an example of this. I have over here, just out of reach from the camera, a coaster for my table. You'd say, oh, what's a coaster? This is a coaster. Look, you can set a drink on it and you're good to go. Or you can ask, what's an example that came up today in class was, what's candy? And I might give you examples of candy, but how might that fail? Well, I will only have so far of an understanding as your examples are able to give me that understanding of. So if you say, what's candy? And I list you off 3 different types of chocolates, well, suddenly I might think that candy is just equal with different types of chocolates. I might not know that, Sour Patch Kids are included in that larger genus. And so my understanding will be in error. And so we decided that the best way, so long as it's possible, and it generally is, the best way to come up with a definition is to use a genus and the difference of that genus. By that, I mean you have the broader category. And that broader category is going to give you several different species, right? So if I say furniture, those species might be chair, table, lamp, etc. Now that I have the genus, I want to tell you why this one species of the genus is distinct, right? So if I'm going to give the example we went over in the homework is, what is the genus and difference relation between a way of defining a queen? You might say, well, it's a female monarch, right? Monarch would be the genus. Monarch includes both kings and queens. And now I'm selecting just one of those species in order to give you the definition of a queen. And that's a really good way of using words to connect one word, queen, with the term. And that's the idea of a female monarch. Okay, there's some guidelines, though, when you're coming up with genus and difference relations. And for this, I'm more or less just following the example that the book offers. So keep that in mind and maybe be following along. The first one is that a definition should state the essential attributes of the term. By this, I just mean that a definition should not include those things which are accidental to the term, but only those things that are necessary, okay? Essential means necessary, accidental means not necessary or expendable or you can get rid of them. If I talk about the color of the bricks behind me, Well, those are going to be that color is going to be accidental. It's going to be expendable. If I talk, however, about I don't know, the wetness of water, maybe. That might be something that is necessary to water. That's an interesting one. I would say that's a proper accident in a way, but we're going to get into hairline distinctions that I don't want to get into too much. Or I might talk about the flat surface of a table, right? I can't imagine how you can have a table without a flat surface. And so the flat surface of the table is probably going to be a necessary feature. Doesn't mean it's the best thing to define it by, but it means that it's more important. It's more, it's closer to the definition of the term than something like the thing that the table's made out of, or the color of the table, or the veneer on the table, or something like that. Those would all be accidental or non-essential features of the table. A definition should, number 2, not be circular. This is something you oftentimes see if you talk to, for some reason I find that like 5th, 6th, and maybe even 7th graders, but especially 5th and 6th graders, really struggle with this concept unless you explain to them what they're doing and you ask them for a definition of something and they'll use the term in the definition. So you might say like, well, what's a table? And they'll be like, well, it's a table, right? It's a table. That's a true definition. Certainly a table is a table. We learned the law of identicals, or the law of identity, but it's not a very good definition. If I don't know what that word means, I don't have an idea of the term, if you just give me the word again, it's just not very helpful. In the end, we'll end up calling that a tautology, which is when basically you make x equal x. It's like, it's true, but it's not very helpful. And generally in logic, we do want to do things that are helpful, even though we sometimes are painstakingly slow to be able to get there. Saying that a table is a table will never get you any further, even if it is true. Similarly, law number 3, or rule number 3, a definition should not be too broad or too narrow. Okay, so I don't want to just give that a table is a piece of furniture with a flat surface. Why? Because it's too broad, because chairs have flat surfaces. That might be an essential attribute of a table, but it's too broad. Or I could give you something too narrow. I could say that a table is a wooden piece of furniture with a flat surface and legs that you can eat off or something like that. I can give you the perfect definition of a table, but I could specifically include that it's wooden. And now suddenly I have too narrow of a definition. Why is it too narrow? Because there are tables that are not wooden. There are tables that are metal or plastic or what have you. And so that's not going to be a great way of making the difference of the genus specific enough. Or it's going to be a way of making it maybe too specific for defining table. Now, that might be a good way of defining a wooden table, but that's a different thing in of itself entirely, or at least it's more specific of a thing. Number 4, a definition should not be unclear or figurative. And this is where we finally begin pulling again from those, from our understandings of vague, ambiguous, and they add the other qualification, which is obscure. So a definition should not be vague, ambiguous, or obscure. Now remember, vague is that it's an undelineated extent. Or like I say, this is too small. It's like too small in comparison to what? I say it's too bright. Too bright in comparison to what? It's too soon in comparison to what, right? I need to make that more clear. That's vague. Ambiguous is it's a word that has multiple terms for the same word. Right is the example we oftentimes use. I can even, as long as I'm not spelling it too, I'll talk about like writing, like on paper. I could talk about right as far as like the right side of the hallway. I could talk about right as in correct. That one word has many different terms that it refers back to, some of which even have the same spelling. So that makes it very confusing. I used the example the other day, too, about the word table. The word table actually can be a bit ambiguous because I could talk about a table as in the thing that I am currently filming this video on, wooden table in my classroom, or I could talk about the periodic table or a table that you find in your math book, like a little chart that you have, right? Those are two different uses of the term table. So a lot of words actually have some ambiguity to it. You try to eliminate that if at all possible. And then when it refers to the obscurity of the word, that just basically means that rather than a word having multiple meanings or not a clear enough context, that it doesn't really signify anything in of itself. It's just too obscure, or it's not well known enough, right? If I wanted to use very fancy words and terminology such that you had no idea what I was talking about, not a very good definition. Why? Because now I'm going to require you having a further definition of my other words. This one's a little tricky, and I generally won't grade you on a quiz about obscurity, simply because it's really up for debate what's obscure. We talked about one of the questions in the homework assignment being about capitalism and socialism. Now, if you're 18 years old, 19 years old, I'm going to expect you to know what those words are. When you're in 7th grade, I don't have quite that expectation. So are those words obscure? It's a little bit difficult to determine that. It's going to depend on your context, right? Some of the terminology that we use in this class is obscure until, of course, after you've learned it when you take Logic 2, and then you should have an understanding of what that is. So there's a vagueness to the obscurity of words such that I'm not going to hold you to that, but it's still very fair. Definitions should be stated positively. Now, keep in mind, we've talked about the ambiguity of some words. Positively is a word that can be ambiguous. Or, if you're going to put this in terms of a discussion or like a debate, sometimes we say that someone is equivocating when they're using the same term in multiple ways. They're using it ambiguously. Okay, the word positively can be the case for positively. I can say that a definition should be stated positively, and by that I mean such that the persuasive definition makes it sound good, right? That's not what this refers to. Okay? When I say that a definition should be stated positively, I don't mean in a persuasive way that sounds good. Instead, I mean it should not include negatives. Okay? So I don't want to say that a king is not a female, but is a monarch, or is a monarch who is not a female. That would be a bad definition because I'm putting not female as the difference between that and the genus monarch. Or I could say that a queen is a monarch who is not a male. Again, I noted in class how these typically actually also kind of come across offensive, right? Because if I'm only defining a man or a woman based off of them not being the opposite, that's like not awesome, right? It kind of feels like, wait, don't we have some sort of something in and of ourselves? But it's also just kind of unclear. If I was to list out for you all the types of furniture, and then I just have a general dump category that says, and anything that's not one of the other species of furniture, that's fine. It works, but it's not the most ideal way of doing it. Now, sometimes you have to do it, and the example of the book is like bald or maybe even blind, right? I don't know, there's a couple of other examples that can come to mind as well. And we usually refer to these as definitions which include a privation. A privation is the lack of something. If you're bald, it's not having hair, right? It's really difficult to define baldness apart from some sort of negation of hair, or blindness apart from some sort of negation of sight, right? How would you even affirm that something is blind? Notice for anything else too, it's not like a door can be blind, technically speaking. So that's like a negation of sight where it is, there in potentiality or something like that. But now we're getting into other discussions about act and potentiality, which is stuff that we're going to discuss more sophomore year. So stay tuned for that. But when I say that a definition should be stated positively, I mean you should not have a negator in the definition unless it's absolutely necessary. And spoiler alert, I will generally try to make sure that it's not necessary for you on quizzes and tests at least. Finally, the sixth point is that a definition should be of the same part of speech as the term. If I use the term that I'm using as a verb, your definition should be a verb. Generally, if I'm using a verb as a definition, I will make it into the infinitive form. So it says, what does it mean to walk? And then I would use a definition that includes to move in such a way that one leg is constantly on the ground at all times. So now I've given you the genus, which is moving, and the species, which is in such a way that one leg is always on the ground at all times. Now that might also allow crawling to be in the definition walking, so I'd have to think through that a little bit more carefully. That being said, the important point is that the part of speech is the same. If I'm defining a verb, my definition should be in a verbal form, or both will probably be in the infinitive. If I'm defining a noun, my definition should be as a noun. And so you probably want to just check and look back at everything. If I'm seeing like little INGs at the end of one side of the equation, right, with whether it's the definition or the term, and it's not on the other side, I might have an issue. If one of them is placed as an infinitive, where it has the to right before the verbal form, and it's not the case when I'm giving the definition, that's going to be a problem as well, too. Okay, so I'm aware this is a longer video, but it's important because this is going to be what you're quizzed on very soon. And we don't want to slow down any more than we need to, especially for these 2 lessons. To summarize, once again, a definition should be part of the essential attributes of the term and not part of the accidental or non-necessary attributes. A definition should not be circular. Typically, that just means you shouldn't include the word in the definition. A definition should not be too broad or too narrow. You want to make sure that the definition only includes the things that it has in mind and not other things that are just outside of the definition. A definition should not be unclear or figurative. We don't want to make a definition overly poetic. We don't want to make it vague, ambiguous, or what's the other word that we're talking about? Obscure. That's right. And then a definition should be stated positively, if at all possible. There's very few exceptions to that, though there are some. And then the definition should be the same part of speech as the term. Those are the 6 points that I'm going to want you to practice on. I'm not going to ask you what they are. I'm not going to say what are the 6 rules of doing a good definition, but I want you to be able to know how to implement them. Have fun practicing them. Again, if you finish your homework tonight, you can bring it to me tomorrow, and I will check it for you and tell you which ones that you want to fix. I'm doing that in particular this time because I want you to have a chance to check your work before you take that quiz. Now keep in mind, after we take the quiz, we're going to review all of Unit 1, and then we're going to re-review, or we're going to have a test on all of that. So don't stop studying what you have already learned because it continues to build. If you have any questions, please let me know. I apologize for this being a longer video, but I hope it's informative so that you can grasp all the concepts that you need to. I'm here in my classroom, usually for a while after class as well, too. So I'm happy to talk. All right, bye.